Well, and now for something completely different. My name is Paul Gasek. I have a little company, a production company up in Brewster called Stony Brook Films. And in my professional life, I've been a commercial fisherman and a documentary filmmaker. And everybody working in the Big Blue has stories to tell. Stuff happens out there. And as young guys, we used to hang out at Fred Powell's shanty in Stage Harbor, and he and Creighton Nickerson and some of the old guys, and they would just yak, and we would listen. It was glorious. And it wasn't always funny, you know. There were like freak accidents, incredible luck, harrowing escapes. But, you know, and I think anybody who works on the water has stories like that. I think it's one of the great things about working on the water. Anyway, many years later, I was still telling Big Blue stories. In 2015, National Geographic commissioned me to write a 6-part series on the ocean, and so the working title was Big Blue Machine. We still haven't made the series, and that's what happens so often in television. It just takes forever. But I was trying to do something original. There are a lot of ocean series out there, and so I went with the ocean as a grand mechanism, because I think a lot of people don't know how the ocean works. In fact, most of the audience doesn't. Most of the audience doesn't live by the shore. And so that's what we did, more where it came from and how it works. You know, most people don't know that the largest migration in the world happens in the ocean every night, where all the stuff down deep comes to the surface and then goes back down. And the ocean is salty because of emissions from deep sea vents and from all the rivers, dissolved minerals in the rivers flowing into the ocean. I didn't know it until I did the research. People don't know about sharks either. For 3 years, I ran Shark Week for Discovery Channel and tried to put the science back into sharks. We have one of the largest aggregations of great white sharks in the world right now off Chatham. And the reason they can hunt this far north is because they're one of a handful of species of sharks that are warm-blooded. They're 5 out of 400. Makos and poor beagles are also that way. So that's why we have all the great white sharks up here. There's another story. You know, in 1602, when Bartholomew Gosnold coasted into Cape Cod Bay, he found so many codfish, he called it Cape Cod. Try and find a fish market on Cape Cod right now selling locally caught codfish. You can't do it. You can't do it. Then there were seafarers who went whaling. You know, all the machines of the Industrial Revolution were lubricated by whale oil. People lit their houses with whale oil. And now we struggle to preserve just a remnant of one of those great herds. So when my brothers and I walked out on the Brewster Flats in 1958 as little boys, we could get steamers and quahogs just there. My grandnieces can't do that. In the 70s, when I was fishing in Chatham, we could steam 2 hours offshore and fish for a couple of days and come in with 10,000 pounds of codfish with haddock, pollock, cusk, hake, a few halibut. And if we caught dogfish and skates, it was a wasted day. It was a disaster. Now people fish for those things on purpose. Why? Because there aren't any codfish to catch commercially. So for me, I think this conference is really about the future more than the present. You know, what kind of a future do we want in the Big Blue? And what are we willing to do to get it? You know, how will we keep what we have, still have, and how will we begin to restore what we've lost? Every morning when I wake up and I go out, I'm full of hope. Hope the boat will start, hope the weather will hold, hope the fish will be there, I hope the whales will show up. But hope isn't going to do it. We've got to do the things that preserve the water and not do the things that contaminate it. E.O. Wilson once said, I'm just going to read it, perhaps the time has come to cease calling it the environmentalist view, as though it were a lobbying effort outside the mainstream of human activity, and to start calling it the real world view. And then my dad was a clergyman, always said to us when he wanted to impress us, he would say, "From those to whom much is given, much is expected." So we've inherited the Big Blue. This is just me speaking now, and I think it's our responsibility to really take care of it. Everyone knows what the Boston Common is. The Big Blue is a common too. It's we have to keep it in good shape. We all benefit from it. We're all a part of it. It belongs to us. And I think water quality has to be at the top of the list. And I think, to be honest, there should be no cherry picking or spinning of science for advantage. We need good, honest analysis and assessment of what's going on out there. We have to admit what we don't know. We have to err on the side of caution and work with the ecosystem, not in spite of it. I've been involved in fisheries for a long time, and I know that fisheries science is based on the answer to the question, how many fish in the sea, which is unknowable. And fisheries scientists have been working that out for a very long time. While they wrangle the numbers, I think the rest of us all can work on the habitat, keep the water clean, keep it, preserve it as a healthy place for organisms to flourish. And I also, again, this is me speaking, I also feel that, no one group should take benefits from the common at the expense or detriment of any other group. And I right now, I know there's a company cleaning up Pilgrim, and they have 1.1 million gallons of radioactive wastewater to deal with. And their solution is to pump it into Cape Cod Bay. That's what they've declared. Now, how can that be possible? I just don't know. I mean, it is a benefit to the company because it is the least expensive option. But just from a perception point of view, who's going to want to eat a clam or an oyster or a fish out of Cape Cod Bay after that? Who's going to want their kids swimming in water that's got radioactive wastewater in it, as dilute as it might be? It's just not a good idea. And then there's wind. I know yesterday everybody talked about wind all day, and I'm glad I've used the Saudi Arabia wind argument before. But I think, there were 23, 25 whales that washed up on northeastern beaches this winter. A lot of people were quick to jump on wind, say it was offshore surveys that were doing it. Other people, there was a lot of evidence of vessel strikes. But what was the truth? It was really hard to get to. I don't know I'm not sure. And I think, when I talk to my friends on the Cape, my fishing friends, other friends, nobody's really quite sure, but there's something suspicious. So I think that, we got to get to the truth of the matter. And I think good, honest analyses, the truth of the matter about everything to do with, because if we don't have the truth of the matter, how can we make the best policy decisions for the Big Blue? The biggest opponents of offshore wind are the fishermen. I just happen to know because, I polled all my friends in Chatham and out on the vineyard, and to a man, of course it's all men, to a man it's a bad idea. And why? Well, it really has to do with a kind of betrayal that happened, or at least a perceived betrayal that happened over the last 30 years. 30 years ago, as the cod fishery began to collapse, people knew it. The National Marine Fisheries Service and other fish regulators came to the fishing community in Massachusetts, but also on the Cape, and said, look, we have a plan. We're going to put it in place, but we're going to restore the fishery with this plan. And it's going to be painful, and it's going to hurt. But if we can all just stay the course, we'll get our fishery back. And so the fishing community went along with that pretty well. People lost their boats. People had to tighten their belts. Big reductions in quotas. all the rest of it. 30 years later, the regulators came out and said, well, remember that plan? Didn't work. And so fishermen particularly feel betrayed, and they don't trust fish regulators or the science they use to determine policy. And I'm not talking through my hat here. I've talked to any number of fishermen about the same way. So the sad thing is that the two groups, regulators and scientists, on sort of in one group, and fishermen in the other group, the two groups in the best position to actually help restore the ground fishery are in a dysfunctional relationship. So I think that needs to change. There's been a serious breach of the trust. And so, as I said, I was in the 70s and 80s, I fished out of Chatham. And so in 2005, when Discovery hired me, my boss had been a colleague of mine at an earlier job. He knew that about me, and he said, well, we've got this series that we've just started, and you're the guy because you're a fisherman and you know the difference between a bow and a stern. And so they made me the exec of Deadliest Catch, which is now in its 19th or 20th season. So I did 2 through 7, and it was like one of those crazy fated things that happens in life sometimes. If you're lucky, man, I just felt like I was meant to do it. And so I called Sig Hansen, because I don't know if you know who he is, but he's one of the guys, captain skipper of the Northwestern, and he and I have stayed in touch over the years. And just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, the Opelio crab fishery up in the Bering completely collapsed. It went from relative abundance one year to almost nothing the next year. So I called up Sig and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, they don't know. He's referring to the the regulators, and they don't know. And I said, well, is it warming seas? And he said, well, it could be. I mean, all the king crab have moved up toward the Russian border up into colder water, so maybe that's what's happened. How about predation? Well, there's a huge Arctic cod stock. They eat a lot of juvenile crab, but it's hard to account for just the total absence of these crabs. An entire species of crab has just gone missing. So I said, well, what are they going to do about it? Meaning, what's the National Marine Fisheries Service going to do about it? And he said, well, we're seeing the fishery in real time. But they're on their own schedule. They're going to do something. It may or may not make sense, and we feel like guinea pigs up here. And I said, well, I know, I get that. And then he said something which I thought was really good. He said, they don't manage it like it's an ecosystem, more like a list of resources. An ecosystem is everything working together, wild and free. And I thought, so yeah, if they don't manage it like it's an ecosystem, it's just a list of resources. And it made me think, I think we all kind of get siloed into our own big blue stories. And it's understandable. But the whale watcher, the oysterman, the fin fisherman, the wind farmer, we're all connected. We all affect each other, and we all need to talk about how we're going to come to the future that we want for the big blue. And there's a connection between what's onshore and offshore, between what happens in the kettle ponds and the eelgrass meadows, out in the bay, between 100,000 septic systems and the plankton the right whales eat in the spring. I think if we're going to restore the marine environment and protect the ecosystem, I think everyone will need to think and behave more like scientists. I think we've all got to be scientists. We've all got to think that way. We've got to be flexible, observant, curious, and honest. No cherry picking scientific data. The data is what it is. And then be willing to change our minds if there's new research or new information, and then act on it. And I guess the last word I want to say is, the bottom line is don't just listen to experts, become one. Learn more. We can all learn more. Do I have a minute, Katie? Okay. The other thing is this, and we may hear about this a little later today. A lot of people on the water right now look like me. That is, they've got gray hair and they're getting older. We've got to figure out a way to recruit a new generation of young people into fisheries and into the blue economy. Right now, it used to be, when I was a kid, if you just had nerve and you could get yourself on a boat, you could go. Or if you could buy a boat, you could go. Now you've got to be a rich person to get into fisheries. All the permits cost a fortune. So there's got to be some way, some pathway for young, when I say young, 20s, just starting out. There's got to be some way to get young people in so that as I want to sit on the shore more, that somebody else is out there excited, watching over the ecosystem, interested. It creates a constituency of people who want the best for the big blue. And I'm all for that. Anyway, that's all I have.